Hi and welcome to Magic Numbers. This is episode number 36, and today we're going to be talking about keeping up with the brokers. So, as we know, brokers is the most busted archetype so far in the format, and I decided to look at some data and try to figure out, is it possible to win with brokers, and if so, what do you need to do that? So we're going to talk a bit about what are the win rates with brokers draft decks and against them, which cards do well against the decks in brokers color combinations. So it's not going to be only brokers per se, so aka Bant, but it's also going to be white blue and white green. And I plan to do broker buster deck examples, but I ran out of time, so we won't have that. I hope that it's going to be enough still, so let's see where it goes. But as always, I'm going to start with my preamble, my 3 minute soapbox moment when I'm going to rant about random things. And today I'm going to be talking about busted common formats can be worse than busted rare ones. And I think that this is part of the problem with the current format is that it's dominated by some really good commons that just overtake the game and are not very well balanced across the color combinations. So obviously, an example card here is Inspiring Overseer, which I think is a card that should not be printed at common level. It's just too good and appears too frequently. If you have a common that is a sort of B plus to A minus level card, and this one definitely is, it wraps the format around it, and you can't do anything about it because they are still going to be 2.4 overseers open per pod, especially in the league play. People that are on the pod where people pass them are going to be highly advantaged. This card is just too good for its own sake. And there was a lot of complaints about Crimson Vow and how busted the rares in Crimson Vow were. But not every draft you will get the busted rare. It will happen, and they are hard to beat. But most of them were manageable, and you could do something about them. Except for probably Dreadfeast Demon was a bit too much. It shouldn't have been printed at rare, or should have been nerfed in some way that would still make it busted, but not no point of return if you don't kill it on spot, kind of busted. This format, I think, is defined by individual card power, and that's what we're going to see in the data quite a lot. And because it's defined by individual card power, it's also not very much um, helpful when you want to find synergies within the decks, because those synergies just are not doing enough. Even if you combine like two cards and try to do something cute, the sheer raw power of some commons and uncommons is just going to take over the game. So my my hypothesis for this preamble is that it's much better to have a bunch of decent commons without anything that jumps out too high in power level, and focus on building sets that have lots of synergy. Because if you can squeeze out something out of a common that normally wouldn't be playable, this creates much more avenues for an experienced drafter to build their deck out of the poorer cards that still can compete with the best ones. And I don't think that here it's the case. Like, Riveteers are doing so poorly because their synergies are just okay and fine in some cases, but are not going to win with a couple of Inspiring Overseers, because all their card advantage from blitzing is going to disappear. The deck is too slow. It doesn't deal very well with the counterparts in Bant colors, so it doesn't attack very well into it. You can jump block and lose in disguise. There's plenty of things why Riveteers are not doing well. If the set was designed better, I think that you could imagine situations where those synergies with Riveteer mechanics would be stronger and would allow you to play a card that is not great and still get like solid results out of it. And in case when you have to compete against busted commons that just don't do anything, they are just rate monsters, that's not going to be possible. So hopefully next couple of sets, there's a good reason why Ikoria was my favorite set. Ikoria allowed you to use almost every card in the set, to some extent, and you can build around most of the things. There were many sub builds because if you combine those synergies slightly differently, you got a completely different game plan that kept the format fresh. And even with the mistake of printing Zenith Flare, which I think was a mistake, I think that the set was very, very much replayable. Okay. With that brushed aside, let's move to the actual data. And first of all, we start with the data summary. As always, all the data comes from 17lens.com, which you should use, support if you can, and definitely use a lot if you want to improve your drafting. So basically try to analyze your own data, try to look at them, try to think what's going wrong, why are you losing games, are you mulliganing too little, are you mulliganing too much, are you forcing too much, are you drafting the hard way too much. It's all possible to see. You can also annoy your friends by sending them links to your game so they have to see how you beat someone by top decking something. That's also very useful. This particular data set mainly is going to be around 150,000 games where 17 lens players played against blue-white, white-green, and Bant decks. So 150,000 games is a sizable portion. So hopefully that's enough to draw some, useful conclusions. So I think that everyone here agrees that brokers are the problem in this format. And to see exactly how big a problem they are, I put some win rates just from the 17 Lens website without digging into the special data. And when you can see that in two color combinations, the highest win rate is from Azorius, the second highest win rate is from Selesnya, and then somewhere in the distance you will see Demir and Rakdos, and somewhere very, very far in the distance you see Gruul at 52% win rate. While Azorius has almost 60% win rate, Selesnya almost 58%, and Demir and Rakdos are staying around 55% win rate. If you look at the two color decks with the splash, again, Azorius and Selesnya at around 57.5% are the top two archetype. Then you got Demir with the splash at 55, and Rakdos with splash and Gruul with splash are at 53%. It's particularly visible that maybe Rakdos is not the best deck to splash it when you look at this data. So if you want to play Rakdos, maybe you should focus on playing a pure version if you can. And if you look at three color decks, Bant, aka Brokers, 58% win rate. So really not far off from the win rates of the two colors versions of the three colors that constitute Bant. And then further away, we have Grixis at 55% and Esper at 54.5%. Then you got Naya like 53.5% and Junt at 51.5%. So that the 51.5%, given the 55, 56% win rate of the 17 lens user, is pretty poor. And, the gap of 6.5% between Junt and Bant is quite a lot. So what I wanted to do then was looking at what are the win rates of 17 lens users against particular color combinations and vice versa. If opponents of 17 lens users play a particular combination, what is the win rate of the 17 lens user? And when you look at this complicated table, what it basically says is that if you look at the top left corner, you have the Azorius 17 lens user deck. So Azorius players win around 59.5% of the mirror matchups against their opponents and win around 61% against white-green and 70% against Dimir. And it goes on and goes on. They win even 52% against broker decks. And you can, check every single draw. I think the interesting part is that non-17 lens users are particularly bad at playing Dimir decks. They basically, lose 62 to 70% games when they're playing against 17 lens users. And on the other hand, 17 lens users are having much better results with Demir. If you look at the rows, the row that says blue black, you can see that, okay, they don't do very well against broker color combinations, but they win like 63% against Gruul, 58% against Rakdos, so they can deal with it, while the non-17 lens users tend to drop a lot of games against 17 lens users. But what you also will see here, and this is something that this bigger graph is actually going to tell you, is that there is a big split in half of the table. So you can see that 17 lens user, independently if they're playing a 2-color deck or a three-color deck, are having a much higher win rates against 2-color decks than they have against 3-color decks. And this made me wonder why that would be so. And I came to the conclusion that actually, when you see the 17 lens user opponent's decks and you see blue-black, it doesn't mean that it necessarily is blue-black. Because, of course, 17 lens tracks the data of the players that use it. So the system will know whether someone plays white-blue or white-blue-green. But if you play against someone and let's say that they play a broker's deck, but they never drew their forest, they never play a green card, the system will think that they played white-blue. But that's not necessarily the case, because maybe they played white-blue-green and they just didn't draw anything green. So in those games against 2-color decks, some part of it, and I cannot even estimate what part of it, is going to be against 3-color decks that just didn't draw very well and they were mana screwed. And this will, of course, increase the win rate against those decks, because if you play a 3-color deck and you only drew 2 of your colors, you're probably disadvantaged, because probably you just mulligan to 5, basically. And on the other hand, the low win rates against 3-color decks that 17 lens users show across the board, basically, are probably... Yes, my cat decided that this is the playtime. Fantastic. So the low win rates against 3-color decks... Scotcha, what are you doing there? He's an elderly cat. He shouldn't be playing. He should be, get a noble statesman kind of approach and lay down and do nothing. But no, this is the activity time, I guess. So the low win rates against the 3-color decks are partially probably because if you play against a 3-color deck and they drew all colors of their mana and were able to play spells of all the colors, they will probably have a slightly better chance, because that also means that the games are going to be slightly longer. And I did test it, and in fact, the games against 3-color decks were roughly a half a turn longer on average, which means that more of those games will be going way above the average of a normal game length. And what we know from previous sets is that the longer the game lasts, the less advantage 17 lens users have, because it also means that probably opponent can stay in a long game, their deck can support staying in the game, and the longer the game tends to last, the closer to a coin flip the result becomes for some reason. So I decided I can't really compare those data across those two halves of the board. So, but what I can do is I can look at the only 17 lens users playing against 2-color decks, and only 17 lens users playing against 3-color decks, because these should be... There is a bias in there, because I know that some of those 2-color decks are going to be actually 3 colors. But the bias should be more or less across the board. So that's not a problem. Question from Josh. What do the numbers look like in these matchups when it's only 17 lens users versus other 17 lens users? So unfortunately, we can't say, because we don't have the usernames of the opponents in the logs. So we can't really say which games are only against the other 17 lens users, unfortunately. So yeah, sort of answers this question, I think. But okay, let's look at the 17 lens users versus 2-color decks. So first thing you see is that I changed the color conditioning that it only takes into account those things in the table, so that the colors look slightly different than in the first table. But what you can see is that generally, against blue-white and white-green, 17 lens users have a pretty low win rate, except if they themselves play Bant colors. So if they play white-blue or white-green or white-blue-green, they have a sort of decent win rate. But um, if you look at especially the 3-color combinations at the bottom, the Grixis, Riveteers, whatever the Junt, yeah, that's the one. Junt and Naya, those win rates are quite low. 50% against blue-white decks and around 53% or 54% against white-green decks. So first conclusion, generally white-blue decks in the hands of the 17 land users' opponents do slightly better than the white-greens. As I mentioned before, blue-black decks used by the not 17 lens users, or at least the opponents of 17 lens users, do really, really poorly. So the win rate for the 17 lens users are, deep into 60, so 65%, probably around that average. Black-red, it's sort of medium. Yes, the Bant decks win against black-red around 62% of the time. But the other decks do markedly poorer, still better than against 2-color Bant decks, so against blue-white and white-green. But it's, more like 50, 57, 58%. And also the 3-color decks do more or less the same, around 56, 57, 58% win rate against black-red. And red-green, it's sort of demolished by the Bant colors, around 65% average win rate. They also get pretty much punished by 2-color decks in Grixis color, so blue-black and black-red. Red-green actually does pretty well in the mirror. And actually, red-green does not so bad against Obscura decks, against Grixis decks, and against Junt decks. But they do lose to Naya decks, so Cabaretti. Which makes me think that red-green can actually deal quite well with the more controlish archetypes that also require to draw multiple lands. That's basically the conclusion from there. If we look at the how do 17 lens users do against the 3-color decks, so keep in mind, 3-color decks means that they are not only 3-color decks, but they also manage to draw all 3 colors of their mana. And probably the games are slightly longer. We can still see that Bant colors do pretty good against Obscura. The rest of them do pretty much medium against Obscura. So every single other deck combination does pretty medium against Obscura. Maybe with an exception of Grixis and blue-black that do okayish, but other color combinations drop to like 51% win rate. The game results against brokers / Bant are pretty abysmal. Gruul decks in the hands of 17 lens users, which have an average of 56%, only win 43% of the games. So that's terrible. Also, the same goes for Riveteers, aka Junt, and for Naya, aka Cabaretti. The win rate against Obscura, other broker decks, and Grixis is at around 50%, 49, 50%. And the same goes for white, green, and blue, black, around 49, 50. And the only deck that really has a higher win rate than 50% is Azorius. So it seems Azorius decks have at least a part recipe to fight against the 3-color decks. Um, then we can see Grixis. So red green does poorly against Grixis when 17 lands decks users are piloting them, which is slightly strange because actually Grixis in the hands of 17 lens user doesn't do very well against red green decks. So it's a bit of a strange dichotomy. It could be something linked to 17 lens user being more content dependent or content friendly. They build their decks slightly differently for some reason. Maybe they try to meme too much when they draft red green, and that's not the way to play with the red green decks. Or maybe it's just that in this particular case, this game length bias is particularly painful. So hard to see which one is that. But yeah, so generally, Bant colors do well against Grixis in the hands of 17 lens users. Rest of the decks do quite poorly against Grixis. So that's something to keep in mind, that even if you find a way of beating the brokers, you might bump into a couple of Grixis decks that will dismantle your game plan very quickly. Generally, except mirror matches, Riveteers are losing quite a lot against 17 lines users, independently if they play 2-color decks or 3-color decks. So, roughly 58% against white, blue, white, green, and blue, black, and slightly lower results with 54%, 54% roughly against Rakdos and the Crew. And the 5-color decks, 3-color decks, they do also run 55 to 57, except for the mirror matchup, which is only at 52%. So yeah. Riveteers also don't perform very well in the hands of 17 lens users. Again, this may or may not be related to the fact that content creation is putting us on the wrong plans, maybe in those decks. It might be also linked to the fact that these 17 lens users usually try not to play Junt, and therefore most of those results come from the early format when people were trying things, and they still didn't develop what should be in a Junt deck, and now they figure out that there shouldn't be a Junt deck, and they don't play it, so the win rate stays quite low. And against Cavaretti, again, the white, blue, white, green, and the blue, black do pretty well. Black, red, red, green, and Obscura do pretty poorly against them, around 50, 51% maybe win rate. Brokers decks, they do well against almost everything except for the mirror, so they have a 57% win rate. Grixis also does well with against Cavaretti, and Junt and the mirror matchups are also quite poor. I think that if you look at the diagonals of mirror matchups, so they don't look very well. Generally, the mirror matchups look closer to the coin flip than to the 6 percentage point advantage of 17 lens users. But again, these games are biased for being a bit longer, and the longer games tend to be more biased to a 50-50 win rate ratio. Okay, the question from King Esquire: what is the sample size? So this is based on 150,000 games. So this particular graph is based on 500,000 games. Because I took all the decks, and further we go, when I only look at games against broker color combinations, it's going to be around 150,000. And I have no idea how many active users are there on 17 lands, because I don't get the user data. I only know the bracket of win rate that the player was in. But yeah, I mean, it definitely goes into thousands. Okay, that's a good point from Josh, that people that lose with Grixis decks uh, they try to build a Rakdos sacrifice deck, but they don't quite get there, and try to build like a Rakdos aggressive deck. And Grixis probably wants to be more of a control deck, and we will see parts of that from the data later. Yeah, that's again, turns out Josh knows what he's saying. Surprise. By the way, Josh is one of the co-hosts of the Draft Lab podcast. I highly recommend. There are a lot of sub archetypes in this set, so if someone is trying to do this set on Rails, it can go really wrong. Yeah, you just need a lot of Rails if you want to draft on Rails, basically, depending on what your plan is. And pick orders probably change very dramatically after first few picks if you sort of know that your best cards dictate a particular line of drafting. You need to hard pivot and change your pick orders for that. Okay. So, first of all, let's think about what beats Azorius. And here are the win rates of all color combinations against Azorius. So this means that 17 lens users played the deck that is on the graph, and they played against Azorius in the hands of the non-17 lens user, or against the Azorius in the hands of 17 lens user's opponent, because there might be as well some users in that pool, and we just don't know. And again, keep in mind that the white-blue decks doesn't mean that they probably are only two-color white-blue decks. There might be three-color decks in Obscura or in Brokers that just didn't draw into their mana. So this set will be slightly biased for that. But what we see is white-green and white-blue have around 60% win rate against those blue-white decks. Then we have Brokers, so the three-color white, blue, green at 58-ish%. And these are three by far best performers against white, blue. Then we drop to black, red, and red, green at 57 and 55%. Then we drop further with the Dimir at 54% and Obscura at 54% as well. And then we see another drop, and we have 52% for Cabaretti, 50% for Maestros, and 50% for Jund, roughly. What you can also see is that except for Brokers, which are, as we already noticed, quite broken, all four of the three-color combinations do markedly worse against the white-blue decks than the two-color decks. So I don't know how much weight to put on this particular data results, but it seems that there is something that white-blue decks with their tempo approach can deal quite proficiently with three-color decks, because three-color decks will stumble a bit more, and if you stumble against a tempo deck, that's basically it. So this is probably white-blue is the sort of fun police of this format. So King Esquire is surprised that Gruul is higher than Demir. Keep in mind that this difference is not really large. It's like 1.5 percentage points. So it can be due to the sample size. And it might be also that those games are slightly biased to be shorter, and then Gruul will do better in shorter games, because if the game is shorter than Gruul, Gruul will usually either win quickly or run out of steam. And in this format, it mainly runs out of steam, but maybe in those shorter games, you disproportionately sampled the games that were slightly shorter. So maybe that's the reason why blue-black wants to maybe play a longer game. So that's one thing. Okay, I looked at all the cards and their game and hand win rate against Azorius decks. So I basically recalculated game and hand win rate for only playing against decks that are white-blue. And from that data, when I took cards that had like a reasonable sample size, I found 108 cards with a game in hand win rate of over 56%. And out of those 108, 72 were in banned colors. And there were 34 commons in that pool. Because I'm not going to focus on the rares. Um, Sam is asking if is one of the commons Overseer, possibly. So there were 34 commons in that group, and 27 of them were banned, and 7 were in the non-banned colors. And there were 33 uncommons, and 23 of them were in the banned colors. The uncommon number is already looking closer to what would you expect, because you know, you'll probably have roughly 50% of the uncommons that will be in the band colors, and 50% of the commons that will be in band colors. I didn't do an exact calculation there, um, but probably something around that, judging that there are some multicolor cards as well. So yeah. So let's take maybe a quick look at those commons and uncommons. I just mixed them together, so I didn't separate the commons from uncommons. Best commons and uncommons versus Azorius. And on the first place, actually, it's a non-banned card in Nightclubber. It seems Nightclubber is really good versus Azorius. This is not really something that surprises me. There's plenty of those white-blue cards that have 1 toughness that are really hosed by carefully positioned Nightclubber. But then we have a bunch of banned cards. So we have the Inspiring Overseer, Fairy Vandal, Disciplined Duelist, in places 2, 3, and 4 at around 63-64% win rate. Nightclubber has 64.6. Then we have a second non-banned card in Grisly Sigil, the 1 mana, deal 1, gain 1 life to deal 1 to a creature, gain 1 life, and you can casualty it to copy it. And if that creature was dealt damage before, it deals 3 damage, and you gain 3 life instead. So you can basically use it to kill 2 1 toughness creatures, or you can use it to kill a 4/4 with the casualty. And the casualty costs 1, basically, so you can sacrifice anything almost. And then we continue on the band team. We have Raffine's Informant, Mage's Attendant, Psychic Pickpocket, that's the 5 mana Manowar, Illuminator Virtuoso, double strike creature. So we have already Disciplined Duelist and the Illuminator Virtuoso as 2 cards with double strike that do well in the format. Celestial Regulator, that's the blue-white signpost common, I guess, the 2/3 flyer that can tap something. And Lagrella the Magpie, Civil Servant, Jewel Thief, Citizen Scrubber, and Sky Crier. So except for Nightclubber and Grisly Sigil, every other card could go in a banned deck, basically. But you have to also keep in mind that even in a non-banned deck, these cards can still be strong. So I can imagine playing Fairy Vandal in some kind of a tempo version of Grixis, or Fairy Vandal in some kind of a connive-based Obscura deck. So there is this possibility. Or again, Psychic Pickpocket does pretty well in Grixis decks as well. So the fact that those cards are in banned colors doesn't mean that they have to be played in the banned decks. Yes, DDAVBPDBDPP. Sorry, but it's your choice to pick up a complicated nickname that I cannot read. I assume that it's just mixing of PVDDA. R. Wait, actually, there's no R in there. Brokers beat brokers. Got it. I think that this is one of the main conclusions, is that literally brokers combinations are the most powerful combinations in this format. But yeah, we try to find at least pathways for other decks to win. And I think that the main pathway to win against Zorius decks is really getting an early Nightclubber and then building around it, because I think that this card hoses the Azorius decks quite proficiently. We are only talking about Azorius now. There's going to be the same data against Selesnya and against brokers. So maybe Queza will, if I remember correctly, Queza will show up. DDAVP? Okay. Okay, I didn't know. Um, so yeah, as I said, from the 15 cards that I have here, 13 of them were in the band colors. So I decided to look at only the cards that are not in the band colors and see what makes the non-band decks tick against Azorius. Yeah, it also Clubber messes Overseer. It messes the 2/1 Informant and Throng. It also messes the Metropolis Angel if they play the white blue. It also hoses, if you play it early enough, Virtuoso. So there's plenty of targets that it can kill. You can also play it post attacks in some cases to kill some bigger things. So yeah, there's plenty of applications of that card. Oh yeah, and fish tokens. That's very important that it does kill the fish tokens because those fish tokens can be annoying in the late game. So yeah, when we look at the non-banned commons and uncommons, we basically see again Nightclubber and Grizzly Sigil at pretty high results. Third place did surprise me. It's the crew captain, the Jund 3 mana 4/2 that has haste and indestructible on the first turn, and then just becomes a 4/2. This card I would like to point out has a pretty small sample size, just around 200 games, which is a sample size, but it's always wise to approach those smaller sample sizes with caution. But maybe I can imagine that this sort of like let you race efficiently because it has haste. 4 power with haste on turn 3 can be useful. It might stop them from making some attacks, and you might get enough to play something that will stop them basically. I'm trying to catch up with the questions, but there are no questions actually. It was just lots of comments about crew captain. Then we have Queza, so the card that was just mentioned at 60% win rate. That's the Obscura 1/3/4. Whenever you draw a card, you drain for 1. Strangle at the pretty solid 60% win rate when you draw it against the Azorius decks. Whack. So we have like a couple of removal here. We have Grizzly Sigil, Strangle, and Whack. It seems like these cards can actually work against Azorius decks. And a couple of cards that did surprise me were Daring Escape. And this is the card that I probably should tell what it does because few people play it. That's the 1 mana instant, gives +1/+0 and first strike, and you scry 1 for 1 red. This has a really solid 58.5% win rate and antagonize at 57.2% win rate. So 2 combat tricks quite high in this pile. Then we have Ognis the Dragon Lash that does something with the haste creatures. And there's Torch Breath. That's the 4th removal in the pack. That's the 1 red X spell that deals damage and gets discounted for something. Pugnacious Pugilist, that's the pretty good red uncommon. Unfortunately, not supported by the rest of the red cards. The 4/4 that makes devils when it attacks and has blitz as well. Fake Your Own Death, another combat trick, but much more versatile, and still has slightly lower win rates than Daring Escape and Antagonize. I would guess that Daring Escape and Antagonize are played in the decks that are custom made to boost particular synergies, while Fake Your Own Death will be played in more generic decks, which will lower its win rate because not every time it's going to be in an aggressive pool. Then I don't know why, but there's a Dapper Shieldmate. I don't think it should be there because it's a banned card. When you make data, mistakes happen. And we have Plasma Jockey and Corpse Appraiser. So Plasma Jockey is the 4 mana 3/1 that can be blitzed for 3 mana and makes one creature not being able to block. I guess again, alpha attacks with that thing are possible when Azorius decks are racing you in the sky and have maybe one blocker left to stop the rest. And then finally, in last place, Corpse Appraiser with 56% win rate. So all these cards are, except from Strangle, Whack and Daring Escape have around 58.5, and the rest of them are in the 57-56% win rate range. So there's like the end of the group of cards that I was analyzing, because I only looked at the cards with win rate over 56 in this particular case. So yeah, that concludes the Azorius part. And basically, best way is again playing some sort of brokers deck or 2-color combinations that are inside brokers. These seem to have these definitely have the highest win rates. But if you are playing a deck because you were in that particular seat when something was open, that is not brokers, then I guess removal is important. Combat tricks can be good, and it would be interesting maybe to look deeper into the builds that managed to win a lot of games against Azorius using those combat tricks and how they were constructed, and what are the cards that make them tick. Because I don't see any like 2 drops, for example, in this card pool, and yet I do see combat tricks being pretty good. Or the super good quality creatures like Nightclubber and Pugilist, for example, they will do pretty well, or Corpse Appraiser. So yeah, long story short, removal, tricks, and rate monsters. That's the way to win with Azorius, and you still don't win that much with that. Looking at Selesnya, and here we again see a graph with the 17 lands users win rate against their opponents that played Selesnya. And you can see that first 3 places, basically within 0.2% from each other, are white-blue, white-green, white-blue-green. So again, if you want to beat Selesnya, play brokers. However, if you don't, we have a slightly different order here. So first of all, Cabaretti is number 4 with 55.5% win rate. The first 3 were at 61.7 on average. So there is a huge drop off against white green between playing brokers colors and the non-broker colors. But we have Cabaretti on at 55.5, Demir at 55.3, red green again pretty high and probably surprising to some at 55%, and Grix is at 54.8. So actually, all those 4 decks are within so close to each other that that you shouldn't treat them as very different. Then there's maybe a slight drop off, and you have the Obscura and Rakdos at 53.5 roughly, and Riveteers at around 51.2. I think that Riveteers is the deck that particularly will be predated by the white green, because a bit of lifelink and then Riveteers with the wheels fall off basically. And if you can open with the Civil Servant or something like that, they will not do very well in that game. Right, so in this particular combinations, I've seen 143 cards with the game and hand win rate over 56%, and 102 of them were in Bant colors. So again, like a lot, basically much more than you would expect if it was balanced. And then out of those 143 cards, 50 were commons, but 43 of those commons were in Bant combinations. And there were 47 uncommons, and 31 of them were in Bant combinations. So again, on the common level, just nothing can compete with Bant decks, and that's quite visible in this data set, and also in Azorius, you could see that again from 34 commons that could beat Azorius at over 56%. At 27 of them were banned, and here we also have even more, and also only 7 of them are not banned. And 47 uncommons, 31 of them banned. So it seems that uncommons are where the potential to beat banned decks is. And of course, bomb rares are going to do the job sometimes, so that's something to know. Carl256 says, I assume the red-green decks are just able to land on the board sooner than the white-green gets established. I actually don't know. I mean, that's very possible. I would have to really look deeper into the successful red-green builds. Hopefully, I will do that by the next week when I'm trying to do my archetypist episode for this season, when we'll try to establish successful builds for each archetype and which cards make them tick and stuff. So, yeah. Next week, we might be talking about exactly that. So best commons and uncommons against Selesnya, and number one is Disciplined Duelist. Like this card, literally hoses Selesnya decks. It has around 69% game in hand win rate against Selesnya decks. Then we have a slight, large drop off, almost 3 percentage points drop off. We have Out of the Way, Lagrella, the Magpie, Illuminator, Virtuoso, and Inspiring Overseer, roughly the same, around 66%. So two sort of tempo plays in Out of the Way and Lagrella the Magpie, and two creature. Well, Inspiring Overseer is just a thing on its own, and Illuminator Virtuoso is another double striker to go with Disciplined Duelist. So this double strike package, I think that, looking at data, it's just like the most synergistic package in the whole format. I mean, you can talk about a lot of other cards, but I see those double strikers in literally every single piece of data. Armoric is asking, are you using the direct win rate of each of these cards, or is it weighted but how much more they win against uh, white green compared to against the field? No, this is the win rate against Selesnya. It's not like how much more they win against against Selesnya compared to the field. No, this is direct win rate. So basically, if you draw a Disciplined Duelist against the Selesnya deck, you will sort of win 69% of those games. Okay, so then we have a slight drop of around 55% win rate, and we have Mage's Attendant, Psychic Pickpocket, and Dual Thief. So two rate monsters in Mage's Attendant and Dual Thief, and a tempo play against Psychic Pickpocket. I mean, the card does quite a lot. Then we have, I think, then we have the two drops with the Citizen's Crowbar and Raffine's Informant at around 64% win rate. And we also have Gathering Throng in the same kind of category, and Darling of the Masses. And again, that's 64%. So Darling of the Masses, I don't know, possibly a rate monster if it's in the right deck. And then a couple of solid aggressive creatures that can actually gain some card advantage as well on top of that. Then we have Broker's Charm, Fairy Vandal, and Make Disappear at 63. As you noticed, in the top 15 of the best commons and uncommons versus Selesnya, there is literally not a single card that is not playable in the Bant decks, which tells you something about it. And it's not surprising when you look at the win rate data. I mean, the Bant color combination decks had such a higher win rate against Selesnya than anything else. And again, this is a part of the problem, as Josh very wisely said. There are many different builds within a single family, and white-green decks are very different from blue-white decks. And you can have cards that deal well with blue-white decks, but then you're going to lose pretty painfully to the Selesnya decks. Or you can focus on beating Selesnya, but then you will not be so good against Azorius. And then you play it against a Bant deck that might be slightly tilted toward white-green synergies, or slightly tinted towards beating or being a blue-white deck. And it's very hard to judge what happens there. And I think that this diversity of successful strategies within the Bant color combination is a part of the problem in the format, that you basically can't prepare for both versions, and you will meet both versions because multiple people drafted. And when people drafted and know what they're doing, they will tend to at least tilt their deck towards one or the other strategy. So which non-banned commons and uncommons are good versus Selesnya? And we see some similarities. And again, this Dapper Shield Maid, I don't know, I must have by accident wrote that it's a non-banned card. Well, okay, doesn't matter. But it's still the fourth best card against Selesnya decks. My God. Number one is Corpse Appraiser at reasonable 62.6% win rate when you draw it. Then we have Whack and Grizzly Sigil, two removal spells. Ignore the Shield Maid. Then we have Strangle. All of them are around 60% win rate. And out of the four really cards in non-banned colors that we had in this graph, one is a Raid Monster, Corpse Appraiser, a really great card, and three of them are removal. So I guess that the key to the success against Selesnya is loading up on removal. In this way, it's similar to what was good against Azorius. So probably you want to have some kind of a red-black package full of removal. Then we have Night Clubber, and that is much lower than against white-blue, because white-green will have a bit beefier creatures. And yeah, I think Small Sam has a very good point. The key is to destroy early civil servants from his experience. And that's also from my experience, if it's worth anything, that, early civil servant can be game warping. And if you don't deal with it, then you're just dead, basically. And that's probably, as Josh mentions, that's probably why Strangle is such a key card. And so is Whack, if I'm not mistaken. No, Whack has a discount for white cards or for green. Either way, it works against Civil Servant. And Grizzly Sigil can, if it really needs to, deal with an early Civil Servant as well, if you have something to sacrifice. So yeah, then we have the Night Clubber at 60% as well. And then we have one card that surprised me, the Brazen Upstart. That's the Cabaretti card. The 4/2 with Vigilance, that when it dies, you can look for a creature in the top 5 cards of your library. It does pretty well, again, 60%. So you might basically out Selesnya the Selesnya by playing the extra red and having those Strangles and the Brazen Upstarts that can probably go quite late in the draft by now. That also can, attack them and still on the block they can deal with, for example, Civil Servant. So a useful card, and you get a card advantage out of that. So if you can play it, and if your mana can support it and can drop it early in the game, you probably want to include them in your Cabaretti builds, because it deals so well with the better aggro deck, basically. Then we have, again, the Quasar Ogre of Agonies. That's the Obscura card, the 3/4 that drains. And I think here the life gain is quite important if you play against Selesnya, when you can sort of stabilize with the 3/4 on board and then slowly drain them so that your life total doesn't fall too low. And it's, again, around 60% win rate. Then we have Raffine Silencer, the black connive creature that gives -1/-1 for its power when it dies to something. Again, a card that will block those early threats from Selesnya, and even can 2/1 in some cases, or just kill much bigger creature that might have cost slightly more mana. And also, I mean, Raffine Silencer and Fake Your Own Death is just like a really great combo, because you can give it +2 power, traded with some 4/4 or 3/3, and then it dies and it still gives -4/-4 to something else, which is a great, a great 2/1 really, because you get the Silencer back and you get the Connive again, which fixes your draws. So that's nice. Riveteer's Requisitioner, again, a 2 mana 3/1. So something that can deal with the 3 toughness creatures. Maestro's Charm, which can be a removal as well, has a 58% win rate. And we have Snooping Newsy, something that will eventually become a 3/3, but I don't know, it's probably just a good creature in general. Riveteer's Charm, which can also act as a removal, and Fake Your Own Death and Waterfront District, the two-color blue land. That's, it just shows you that the blue-black does pretty well. And when you look at those, it's sort of like mainly what I would see here would be, well, basically either out aggroing by playing some kind of a um, streamlined Cabaretti deck, or probably the best strategy against Selesnya is just to play Grixis control and have ways of dealing with the early aggression, stabilizing, and then taking over the game. Because I don't think Selesnya does very well when you play longer game in general. So it still does pretty well because you can always drop an Inspiring Overseer and refuel. But if you can stop this early aggression, very often you might be able to deal with the rest. Okay, and here we come. How to beat Bant. As you see, I kept the same at the same scale for each win rate graph in this presentation, and the win rates against the white blue and the white green were in their 60s for the best performing decks. The win rates against pure brokers is at 52% in best case scenario in Azorius. But as I said, this is related to that bias on how we collect the data from opponents. We don't know what their decks are. So if they don't draw a second color, or the game is very short and they didn't manage to play anything from the third color, they will be classified as Azorius and Selesnya. So this is heavily biased towards longer games when opponent drew older lands like a pro, and that's why the win rates are lower. So here again, we see that the two best decks that deal with against the three-color brokers is white blue and white blue green. Third place is not Selesnya, which is slightly surprising after seeing those three-color combinations in top 3 and every other statistic. Instead of that, we have Dimir, and closely followed by Obscura. They are at 49.8, 49.1% win rate. And then we have Grixis at 49 exactly, and Selesnya at 48.9. So all of those blue, black, white, blue, black, blue, black, red, and white, green are roughly on the same level. Probably even Broker's Mirror is more or less on the same level. Well, I think Azorius is slightly higher than the rest of the pack, but those numbers are not inspiring. So most of them sub 50%. Then we drop to 46.4 with Rakdos. Then we drop even further to 44.7 with Cavaretti. And then Junt and Gruel, 43% win rate. So yeah, basically, if you're expecting to see a lot of broker decks, you'd rather be in either brokers or in some interplay of Obscura and Grixis, and you'd rather avoid playing Cabaretti, Jonathan, Gruel, and Rakdos. Okay, so what beats Bant? This time I couldn't look at the cards that had over 56% win rate because there were none. But again, this is partly linked to that bias in the data that opponents with three-color decks are different data set than opponents with two-color decks. So I took a cutoff of 50%, and there were 111 cards with that win rate over 50%, 74 of them in Bant colors again. 35 commons were on that list, and 27 of them in Bant colors, and there were 34 uncommons and 22 of them in Bant colors. So still heavily slanted towards Bant colors, but there are some cards that are not Bant and are basically capable of winning at least some games against brokers. But still, much over represented cards are in Bant colors, basically. So, best commons and uncommons versus Bant. And number one, Nightclubber, which makes me think that Bant decks are more similar to Azorius decks than to Selesnya decks, which, it makes sense from the point of the format. Um, you play white green, you probably have Darling of the Masses, you probably have those civil servants. You maybe don't lean that much on the double strike package. So uh, Nightclubber is not so good against Selesnya. If you play Bant, you definitely want to lean on the double strike package because you have the best uncommon in the set in the Discipline Duelist. Number 2 is Sleeping with the Fishes at 56.8. Uh, Turns out that one evasive fish and getting rid of something big is quite useful. Number 3, Inspiring Overseer, it's good. They are all around 56.5%, 57% win rate, roughly in that area. Then we have Corpse Appraiser and Disciplined Duelist, the 2/3 color uncommons. Good on, like really strong stats on those. Like these are the really good reasons to try play 3-color decks in this format, and which I think you should, as I said last week. But these cards showing up there and again just show you that there is power to be had by playing 3 colors, especially if you can slant your deck into one particularly cohesive strategy. And then we have Psychic Pickpocket, again another creature that is just so good on rate that it does win. Exotic Pets, the thing that makes 2 fish at 55.5%. That's the second card that makes fish in the list of things that deal well with Bant. You have to keep in mind that Bant has many, many strengths, but one weakness is they don't have that mass kind of interaction. They will have to use a real card to get rid of the fish. So fish against Bant decks can be quite potent threats, especially if you can somehow enhance them. Then we have Lagrella the Magpie. That's another sort of tempo-y play on your side if you play that particular card at 55% win rate. Make Disappear 55, Grizzly Sigil at 54.7, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the third card that is not in the band color after the Corpse Appraiser and the Nightclubber, and Grizzly Sigil appears more and more in those data sets. It also still has a pretty high alpha, so I think that the general population is much higher on Murder and Strangle than on Grizzly Sigil, but Grizzly Sigil, from every single data set that I looked at, looks like a stronger card in this format. So I think it's good to follow the data and try to figure out which cards are underrated by the general population. I think Grizzly Sigil is one of those cards. Then we have Fairy Vandal. Yeah, it's very good. Quiza, the Obscura 3/4, it's good again. So that card again is probably one of the reasons why you want to maybe splash black into your blue-white deck, or why you want to maybe pick like a Nightclubber. If you pick a Nightclubber and you're in some kind of a blue-white, you might want to pick Quiza as well for sheer power of it. And maybe some kind of an Obscura that can be quite good against Bant if it contains those particular cards: the Nightclubber, Grizzly Sigil, and Quasar. Hypnotic Grifter, one of my format favorites, is also made the list. I think that this card is particularly strong because it makes your late game, if you get to the late game with Bant, particularly powerful, because you will basically never draw a land if you don't want it ever again in that game. And the last on the list is Mage's Attendant. Again, card just strong because of rate. It's pretty powerful what it does. So when we look at the only non-Bant commons and uncommons versus Bant, again, Nightclubber 58.5 as it was in the previous graph, 56% for Corpus Appraiser, and then with a bunch of cards that run 54, 53%, Grizzly Sigil, Quiza. Then we have Nimble Larcenist, another Obscura card, the 2/1 flyer. Whack, the -4/-4 removal spell. Raffine Silencer, the black connive card we talked before that gives -1, -x, where X is its power when it dies. Syndicate Infiltrator, that's the 4 mana Dimir flyer that gets bigger. It becomes a 5/5 when you have the 5 different casting costs in your graveyard. I think that, from this particular list, it seems like Obscura or Grixis are the ways to deal with the band. And you have to keep in mind you want this black removal package and Grizzly Sigil and Whack, because these cards will deal quite well with, for example, Disciplined Duelist. And you definitely want the Night Clubber, and then you want to, you know, supplement those with, and Syndicate Infiltrator is also good against Duelist, basically, and the other double striker, and against shield counters in general. They deal well with shield counters and fish. So yeah, you want to make this package of removal that is somehow resistant to shield counters, plus strong on rate creatures like Corpse Surpriser, the Quasar, Nimble Larcenist, and things like that. I think that both strategies, Obscura and Grixis, can be pretty powerful against them. And it also suggests that you probably want to have that third color to deal with the brokers, because that allows you to play the cards that can do some damage to that menace of the society. Then we have the involuntary employment, the steal a creature effect. That will be, probably good in some Grixis shells. Dusk Mangler, the 5/4 5/4 for 7 mana that basically makes them lose 4 life, sacrifice a creature, discard a card in ETB, and you have to choose one of those options for yourself as well. I think that this is good for some sort of attrition version of game that I think both Grixis and Obscura can do pretty well. When you try to limit their board and kill all the smaller things, make sure they cannot go wide, and then at the end, when they have one big threat, you deal with it by playing Dusk Mangler, and you sort of force them to sacrifice it, and you're ending up with a 5/4, and they are on the back foot then. So that's a possibility there. But you have to keep in mind, those cards have 53, 52% win rates. And the rest of the cards I'm going to mention are around 52% win rate. We have Girder Goons, Murder, Maestro's Charm, Fake Your Own Death, and Snooping Newsy. So again, it seems like some sort of probably mainly Grixis package there, but it possibly can be also used in some Obscura variants. Right. I mean, long story short, just to conclude the seminar today, it's hard to beat the brokers because of the diversity of builds, because of how different builds require different answers. It's really hard to find a precise set of those answers in one color. If there is one picture that appears from there, is that best thing to do is to play a better Bant deck and beat them, or play the Bant deck better than the opponent does. But if you can't, because you landed on a seat that doesn't really, you don't see anything good in Bant, I think the key color to beating it is black. Most cards that we see in the non-banned commons and uncommons are black. And depending on who are you playing against, there are different cards that are powerful. If you're playing more blue-white tinted versions, you really want to load up on those Night Clubbers, Grizzly Sigils, and Wax and Raffine Silencers. If you play against Selesnya, you still want to load up on those Wax and Grizzly Sigils. Night Clubber is slightly worse, but generally, I think that your best bet, if you're expecting to play against a lot of Bant tinted decks, is have a good removal package, play the control game, play the attrition game, and win through that. And I'm pretty sure that there are some specific builds with specific synergy packages that will do much better against Bant. I think that in my data set, I found exactly 9 decks that managed to win 8 games against something that was banned color. So probably all of them were trophy decks. I didn't look into deep detail, but they managed to get paired against banned in almost every single game, and they still managed to win those games. So they played 8 games, but they won only probably 6, 7. Yes, I think Small Sam has a very good point. This list is almost devoid of red cards. There was the 3-1, there was a strangle here and there. There are some multicolor cards that contain red. But for example, you don't see things like Body Dropper. You don't see things like Mayhem. This is Mayhem Devil. Yeah. You didn't see any of those. You don't see the big removal spell because it's like 5 mana, remove a shield counter that just doesn't fly. I think that red particularly got hit by the presence of the shield counters because all the red removal is based on damage, and if you can't, like, you don't want to spend 2 strangles to kill a 2/2 fish because that's what you have to spend in red decks to kill that fish. You really have to be black if you want to deal with that kind of stuff. Well, you can just play it, whack on the fish, and you don't care because it will die. You're almost guaranteed that it will happen. So yeah, okay. So I would like to thank all the people that work very hard so I can get the data, and that will be all the team from 17 Lands. I added ZTM, also known as Ale Ballini, who is the new dev in the 17 Lands team. And also, I would like to thank Fake Jake Brown, who's helping me with putting it out as a podcast, and with basically everything that relates to social media. And yes, for the podcast listeners, I would like to thank to SSQ and Mana Junkie, whose music I'm using in the pod. And with that, I'll see you next week.